Hey everyone, welcome to Wealth Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Reynolds, independent financial advisor and owner of Elevation Financial. I'm on the web at elevationfinancial.com if you want to find me there. Welcome, glad you're here. All right, today we're going to talk about Simple IRA versus 401k. This is for small business owners that may be thinking about offering a retirement plan for their team. Maybe they already offer one. Maybe you're in the process of considering to set one up. This usually happens when small business owners kind of graduate from solo to hiring people, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or more people. As you grow and hire team members, often they will they'll want to offer a retirement plan for team members to incentivize them to, obviously stay and participate in the company, and it's obviously a great benefit to offer people. So, what's the difference? Two of the most prominent plans that are offered are Simple IRA and 401k. There are other plans offered as well, but the ones we usually hear about are either Simple IRA or 401k. And these are the plans that are typically thought of when we're growing a small business and hiring team members and deciding what sort of retirement plan to offer. So a lot of us have heard of a 401k. We kind of think of, hey, if you join a big company, you get a 401k plan. It's kind of a standard term a lot of us know about. The Simple IRA is also fairly common. We may not have heard of it as much, though. It's not as common, but it's recommended a lot of times, especially by accountants and CPAs. I've noticed they like to recommend simple plans because, as the name implies, there is some simplicity to these plans. But you'll kind of see why as we go on from a tax standpoint, why they're recommended by accountants. But that there's not always a one size fits all. So we'll talk about the differences. So what does a simple plan stand for, by the way, just so we have a side note on that? So it's an acronym, stands for Savings Incentive Match Plan. The acronym comes out to look like the word simple. So it's always written in all caps for that reason. So you'll see it as all caps, Simple IRA is kind of how it looks. And again, we know kind of what a 401k is typically. So let's talk about the differences. There are some differences and some similarities. Both are designed to be retirement plans for team members working at a company. They both allow team members to put aside tax advantage money into contribution accounts and invest that money. We won't get into the investment part today, but they're able to invest money in those accounts in things like mutual funds, ETFs, and they act fairly similar in that respect, in that you put money in, the money is invested according to your profile, and it grows over time, and it's meant for retirement. So that's kind of the gist of how they operate. But there are some differences. So let's talk about what those differences are today. So number of employees, that's one of the biggest differences in these plans. A Simple IRA is available to teams of up to 100. So up to 100 team members in your company, you can have a Simple IRA. If you have more than 100, the Simple IRA is no longer an option for you. You're not eligible. 401ks, by contrast, have no limit. So if you're growing, if you think you're going to, be a fairly small company, you're not going to reach 100 employees anytime soon, that's not going to be an issue. But if you're growing fast and you see yourself reaching more than 100 employees at some point, the Simple IRA is going to be quickly obsolete for you. You're going to have to look at a 401k instead. A 401k has no limit on number of employees. All right, so as far as who can contribute, both the employer and the employee can contribute to both of these plans. That's a similarity. The business owner and the employees can contribute. So there's no difference there. When it comes to limits, however, there is a difference. With a Simple IRA, the employee can contribute up to $14,000 in 2022 when this is being recorded. So again, 2022, the limit is $14,000. For a 401k, the employee limit is $20,500, again, for year 2022. So a 401k offers a considerably higher limit for contributions. The catch-up contribution limit is also different. The catch-up contribution is for those over 50. They can put a little extra in to kind of catch up. It's $3,000 for a Simple IRA and $6,500 for a 401k. So again, a much higher catch-up contribution limit as well. So overall, you can typically put more into a 401k. The limits are higher. So what about employer contributions? With a simple IRA, they are mandatory. With a simple IRA, you have to do something. And that something typically takes two forms, one of two options. One option is you match up to 3% of the employee's contributions, or a 2% non-elective contribution, meaning like no matter what they do, you just put in 2% of their pay into the simple IRA plan. So with the simple IRA, there is a mandatory contribution or match. You have to do one of those things. With a 401k, it's not mandatory. There's a lot of customization with a 401k, and you can do a match. Often it does take place, because often with small businesses, a safe harbor plan is typically the best model for many, and there's a 4% match that comes with that. So yes, matching is very common in a 401k, but it's not required. And you've got a lot more flexibility in how you define that match, if you offer a match at all sorts of things around it. So it's much more flexible, and you don't have to offer a match necessarily, or a contribution. What about vesting schedules? With employer contribution vesting, with the simple IRA, it's immediate. So you can't do any kind of fancy vesting schedules where if they stick around for a certain period of time, their account or their match vests at that point. It's kind of a way to incentivize people to stay longer, to retain them more. So if you want to use it as a retention tool, the simple IRA does not really allow that, because all employer contribution vesting is immediate. With a 401k, you can have up to a 6-year vesting schedule. Again, I'm not saying 6 years is the best, but the limit technically is up to 6 years. So you can have much more customized, longer-term vesting schedules, which can be used as a retention tool or an incentive tool for keeping employees at your company. So that's the difference there. What about loans? Without getting into the minutia of whether a loan is a good idea or not, just be aware that simple IRAs do not allow loans. 401ks do. You can do what's called a 401k loan, which means you can borrow a certain amount against your 401k and then pay it back to yourself over time. There are cases where it makes sense. I've had situations where a 401k loan can be a more attractive option as opposed to other types of debt. So again, not getting into the philosophy about whether a 401k loan is a good idea, but be aware that 401ks do offer loans, or can offer loans, I should say. Simple IRAs do not have a loan option. What about profit sharing? There's no profit sharing in a simple IRA. It's just contributions. It is what it is, contributions and matches. With a 401k, you can offer profit sharing, which can go above and beyond the employee contribution, up to $61,000 specifically. So profit sharing is an option with 401ks, which again can be a great way to take care of your team and a great way to provide incentive for company performance and contribution to company performance. All right, what about multiple retirement plans? You can't have multiple simple IRAs. You can have multiple 401ks. Not super common, especially for small business owners, but it is permissible to have multiple 401k plans in place if that makes sense for you. This is not really a pro or a con, just kind of a fact. With plan year end, it's calendar year. With 401k, it can be calendar or fiscal year. Not really a consideration for most small businesses. Most small businesses operate on calendar year, so it's kind of an non-issue, but just be aware there is a difference there. So I alluded to this before. A big difference in the simple IRA and the 401k is plan design. With a simple IRA, there's no plan design. It basically is what it is. The plan is pretty standard, or I shouldn't say pretty standard, it's very standard. There's just kind of one way you set up the plan. With a 401k, it's extremely customizable. You can do all sorts of things with matches, with vesting schedules, with profit sharing, certain types of employees excluded versus included. So it's a lot of customization you get with a 401k, not so with a simple IRA. It's very standard, simple, and, well, non-customizable. All right, this is the big one for me. This is why this is kind of my bias showing, so be aware this is opinion, in my opinion. This is one of the reasons I am not a fan of simple IRAs. There is no Roth provision. Now, will this change in the future? Possibly. There is some chatter about legislation being introduced to allow Roth options in simple IRAs. And if that's so, that could be a game changer. But as of right now, there is no Roth option allowed in a simple IRA. With a 401k, there is a Roth option that can be set up. So a quick review, what is Roth? Roth means your money is invested with after-tax money, and the growth is tax-free. So if you put in, let's back up a second and contrast it with traditional. So a traditional, IRA, traditional 401k, simple IRA, the traditional retirement plan you think about is you put money in, that money is pre-tax or tax deductible, and you get a tax break on it now, and then it grows tax deferred. And then when you use the money later at retirement, that money is taxed at that point. So you save money on taxes now, you pay the taxes later. Roth is the opposite. Roth has no tax deduction. You put in money that's already been taxed. Then the money inside of it grows tax deferred and tax free. When you withdraw the money later at retirement, it is tax free. You do not pay taxes on that money, assuming it all fits into the requirements and the rules you followed. So again, Roth money can be phenomenal for those who, in their life situation, it makes sense for them. And if you build up a lot of Roth money, your taxable base is much lower in retirement, and that money you can use for income, again, is tax-free. So Roth has a really strong place in retirement planning and a lot of really great advantages. So Simple IRA does not have a Roth option, at least as of right now. 401ks can have a Roth option. So that's one of the biggest issues I have with Simple IRAs is, they can be simple to set up. We'll talk about that in a minute. And they're a little more low maintenance in some ways, but the lack of Roth option, I think, is a big deal breaker for me and for a lot of people in many cases. So there's something else that is a difference in 401k versus Simple IRA. Simple IRA has what's called a 2-year rollover rule. And what that means is if you are an employee that leaves a company that has a Simple IRA, you cannot roll your Simple IRA money out of that plan for 2 years, unless you roll it to a new Simple IRA. And who knows if your new employer offers a Simple IRA. They're actually not very common, so there's a good chance they won't offer it. So you're kind of stuck with that money in that plan for 2 years. Now, if you've been there longer than 2 years, you can roll it out, but you have to be in the plan for 2 years before you can roll the money out. So that's, in my opinion, a fairly big disadvantage because you may want to roll that money into a new plan, better options, various reasons, and that's going to be an issue. 401k does not have that restriction. You can roll that money out when you leave your employer. Also, a Simple IRA is subject to the pro rata rule when it comes to things like a Backdoor Roth IRA. Now, we've talked about this in the past on the show. What is a Backdoor Roth IRA? How does it work? Here's kind of the nutshell review. If you make over a certain amount of money, you cannot contribute directly to a Roth IRA. However, you can do what's called a Backdoor Roth IRA that lets you put money into a traditional IRA and then convert it directly to a Roth IRA, and then you've kind of circumvented that rule. Legally, it's legal, but you've circumvented it. You cannot do a Backdoor Roth IRA. I should say effectively. You can do it, but it's really a pain. So you cannot effectively or conveniently do a Backdoor Roth IRA if you have any money sitting in traditional IRAs in your name. So a 401k does not count against that pro rata rule. The pro rata rule says if you have IRA money sitting out there in traditional IRAs, then it makes doing a Backdoor Roth much more complex to the point where it's really not worth it. So if you work at a company and you make over a certain income limit that precludes you from contributing directly to a Roth IRA and you want to do a Backdoor Roth, if your money is sitting in a 401k plan that's pre-tax, no issue, no problem. And if you have no other money sitting in IRAs, you can do a Backdoor Roth effectively. But if your retirement plan at work is a Simple IRA, that Simple IRA money counts as an IRA against the pro rata rule, and it makes your Backdoor Roth almost impossible to do effectively. So for that reason, Simple IRAs, I believe, can be very counterproductive or detrimental to your ability to do a Backdoor Roth IRA if you're in that situation. So those are a couple little nuanced issues with the Simple IRA as well that I think more people need to know about and be aware of. So again, those are that's the factual rundown of the difference. Now, I'm going to be a little bit biased here and give you some more opinion. Simple IRAs can make sense. I'm not saying they're terrible. I don't see them very often anymore. I see them recommended a lot by accountants when a business is growing to the point where it's ready for a full-fledged retirement plan. And here's why accountants recommend them. Because accountants don't care as much about Roth options as I do. as financial planners. Because as financial planners, we are looking long-term. We're looking at, hey, in 20 years, is my client going to want to have Roth tax-free money available? A lot of times the answer is yes. Accountants are looking at, how can I save my client money now on taxes? No right or wrong, both are valid perspectives, but be aware that accountants typically will focus on saving money now because their job is to save you money on taxes right now. And a simple IRA effectively does that. A simple IRA is great for that. It's simple to set up, and it's all pre-tax money, which means you're getting a tax deduction. So it's kind of checking that box of saving you money now. However, the lack of Roth option can be a problem if that's something important to you or something that makes sense for you. So simple IRAs are recommended a lot by accountants, so be aware of why. Also, the differences in setting them up are, I guess I shouldn't say significant, but they're important to be aware of. So a simple IRA can cost very little. It's very inexpensive to set up. It can be basically free or almost free, and it doesn't take a lot of paperwork. It's pretty straightforward. A 401k, by contrast, does take a little more effort to set up. And by effort, I mainly mean a little more cost, because these days there are plenty of 401k providers that make it really easy. The plan sponsor is you as the company, but the administrators and the record keeping is all pretty much done by platform providers nowadays that make it pretty straightforward. There are providers out there that make it really high tech and really turnkey, and you are going to pay a little more. You're going to pay a monthly fee, maybe an annual fee. You are going to pay more in fees, but they're not that much. We're talking like, one of the big plan providers is like, around $50 a month for the base platform, and then like $10 a month per employee. So it's not that much. And I think when you're weighing the pros and cons in your particular situation of simple IRA versus 401k, in my opinion, the cost has come down significantly on 401ks, that the additional fees really shouldn't be that major of a consideration when you're really looking at the options. So it takes a little bit longer sometimes, a little more paperwork, a little higher, a little more in fees, but not that much. 401ks are not that difficult to set up, at least simple 401ks. I don't mean like literally simple 401ks. There's something like that that's actually called simple. But what I mean is basic 401ks, I should say. For a simple small business, handful of team members, a 401k is not that difficult or expensive to set up. So be aware of the differences. Be aware of the pros and cons. Be aware of what's appropriate for your situation, and reach out and ask me if you just have some questions and you're like, hey, what's best for me? I'll be happy to talk about it, but just be aware those are some of the differences in simple IRA versus 401k. And those who recommend one over the other, make sure you know why they're recommending and what their perspective is. Again, going back to the simple IRA, accountants are very, they very often will recommend things like a SEP or a simple IRA because they're focused on that pre-tax money, that tax deductible contribution that saves money now on taxes. But be aware that that's only one perspective. The other perspective is, hey, look at my money long term. Am I going to want tax-free money in retirement? If the answer is yes, then simple IRA may not be the best option for you. You want that Roth money available. You want the ability to contribute Roth money. So those are some differences, some pros and cons, a little bit of my opinion sprinkled in. Hope that's helpful. And if you're a small business that's growing and ready to offer a retirement plan, these are two great options to consider. And I hope this has given you some insight into some of the differences between the two. All right, with that, as always, if you have questions about this or anything else, I'm happy to chat. You can reach me at elevationfinancial.com. There's a button on my homepage that will allow you to schedule a complimentary money session. If I can help with any questions, schedule that, feel free. And I'm happy to talk with you about whatever is on your mind. As always, thanks for joining me today. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.